Do you struggle with getting bent over by your boss, squats, and found out the hard way that your girl's into pegging? Hi, I'm Patrick, and I get bent over professionally, but I've also squatted 1,000 pounds. I've got some tips and tricks to help you stay more erect and upright during your squats. Squats are the most technically difficult lift because there's more moving parts than there are in the bench or deadlift. So when push comes to shove and things get out of whack, tendencies are that you're going to get out of position and your squat's going to look more like a good morning than an actual squat. Things like deactivated muscle cues, the inability to control your center of mass, and just general bad muscle memory going on are a lot of the common things that'll cause you to kind of crunch over and round your back when coming up in a squat, making it look a lot like a good morning. Oh, and don't think I forgot about bar positioning because that is atrocious here too. Of the things I've mentioned 2 seconds ago, the hardest thing to get acclimated to and to control is the center of mass. Now, you've got a different center of mass if you're going squat shoes, which has a heel, versus flat foot. See, when you have a squat shoe, you turn your contact into the floor into a triangle. And if you studied physics or statics or anything, you know that the center of mass changes on a triangle as opposed to a rectangle because they're not the same shape. So the center of mass for a triangle is called a centroid, and it's in the back third of the foot. So you end up losing about 17% of your margin for error, but if you struggle to hit depth, it's worth it to put on the squat shoes. But consider, you got to be more on your heels if you're in squat shoes than you are if you are squatting barefoot or flat foot. I'm going to go over 2 different exercises that will help you control your center of mass, the center of balance, where the bar is centered over your foot while you're in the middle of a squat. And it's not really while we're squatting, we're developing this cognizance and ability to kind of push and pull where it is. It's a struggle with balance. And so the first movement that we're going to be doing is called a roller coaster. So what you want is you want a light plate. I've got a 5-pound plate here. What you want to do is you want to get on one leg and do a straight-legged deadlift, but only go down to about your knee. So like this. And then what you want to do is you want to rock it back and forth. So over here, like this. And if you're looking at my foot, you can kind of see that it's stabilizing myself and I'm able to control where I am with this. Now, while you're doing this, you want to get a good focal point somewhere on the floor. Notice how my eyes are locked down on something and just kind of focus on that and rock back and forth while your body kind of connects to that neural pathway of your balance in your feet and your hands. The next movement is called a goblet squat hold at the bottom, and you want your arms extended on this. So I grabbed myself a 25-pound plate, and what you want to do is if you're in squat shoes, get the squat shoes. If you're flat foot, do this flat foot. You want your feet to be whatever foot kind of position that it is, because this is directly working on your forward backward center of gravity kind of control, whereas the roller coaster was kind of the horizontal, the left and right center of mass control. So you take your squat stance and you squat down and you extend the plate out in front of you. And you hold this for 10 to 15 seconds. And what you want to be able to do is kind of sit back onto your heels a little more. You can kind of see as I sit back, my hips kind of raise a little bit. And that's me just not being at a good upper body. Here we go. My upper body not being erect enough. So this kind of forces you in a position where you have to hold a good position. You find that good forward back center of gravity, center of mass, and you kind of hold it, and then your body gets used to having that position and acclimating your regular squats to what it's like doing it with this goblet squat. So you're practicing before you get under a bar with something really light. Now, I used a 25-pound plate. It's easier with the heavier weight because you're counterbalancing yourself. You have to sit back more. And the lighter weight that you use, like a 5 or a 10-pound plate, it's a little bit harder. Now, putting these two kind of concepts together is a little difficult, but lucky for us, historically, multiply lifters have had a little bit more struggle staying in line in that pathway of where the center of mass is, because multiply lifters have an even smaller margin of error. It's like walking on a slack line. So they have a lot of tools and references that we can use as raw lifters in order to kind of get our center of mass accumulation and the ability to control our center of mass a little easier, because they have tools that make it harder to do that. So we have to be stricter with ourselves in order to do that. The first device that we're going to be using, bar rather, because the multiply lifters develop different bars because you want to be practicing this while squatting, and you have to be squatting in order to practice it, is the safety squat bar. This is a safety squat bar. It's got handles in the front, and it's got this kind of camber on the side to kind of put the weight in front of you to change the center of mass. So you have to be stricter about sitting back more, because in multiply, one of the cues is sit back into the suit. So you want to be able to get better at controlling that center of mass on your foot. So what we do is we take safety squat bar and we put it high bar. I know you may squat low bar, but you want it high bar. And notice the weights are out in front of me. This makes it so that I have to be a little stricter when squatting. I have to be stricter when squatting as to where I put the center of mass on my foot. This camber allows the weight to be in front of me, which means that the center of mass is going to be more over my toes. But I have to sit back, bring it to the middle of my foot, and it's going to allow me, when I'm using bigger weights with my squat shoes, to pull it back onto my heels and feel that pressure a little better. Because if you get out of whack, you notice you round, and it makes that rounding more pronounced because the weight's in front of you. And it puts you in that situation where I'm getting rounded, I have to fight it. But if you use the safety squat bar correctly, you don't have that rounding coming out of the hole, and you have to fight going into that rounding because the weight's in front of you a little more aggressively. Fighting it more aggressively allows you to get better acclimated and more used to what it feels like to be able to pull the weight back. Now, I use the safety squat bar for two reasons. That's the first reason. The second reason is because when you're squatting and you've got bad shoulder mobility, it really affects your shoulders and everything. And if you have a way to squat without having your shoulders all the way out, your hands all the way out, stressing your shoulders and elbows, it's a really good idea to train like that. So we're kind of feeding two birds with one stone here, where we're both practicing sitting back, getting a healthy, good center of mass on our feet, as well as kind of allowing our shoulders and elbows to rehab so that we can abuse them later during bench. The next specialty bar that we have access to is a camber bar, where it's this bar and it jettisons down and has the weight flared out below us, almost at hip level. Mid-back, hip, whatever, really low. This is similar to the safety squat bar, except the safety squat bar has the weight positioned out in front of you. This has it straight up and down as if it's a regular squat bar. But if you go too far forward, the bar is going to swing forward, and you're going to get into a sticky situation. You don't want to be in any sort of sticky situations, unlike a girl after margaritas. So you want to grab, some people grab the vertical part, some people grab the horizontal part, and this mono is set up way too low. You want to take your regular bar position for when you're squatting, and yeah, the bar is tilted a little forwards just because of my hand position. But what happens is if you get any sort of forward momentum, there's this pivot going on right here. If you can see me swinging it, it's going to be jostling all around. The less forward-backward movement you have during your squat, the better. So You take your squat, you get tight, and you make sure you're going straight up and down. So you go through the progression, break at the hips, push the knees out. Making sure there's no swinging going on, because what this bar is, if you get undisciplined with your center of mass on your feet, it'll pull you out of position. So like that, I got on my toes purposefully, and then coming up, I corrected it, and it pulled me back, and I had to take a step. So this one is super good at making sure that you're staying upright, keeping a proud chest, whereas the safety squat bar was all about keeping a consistent fighting backwards. So you got to be more strict with your up and down, making sure you're not going forward and back. Whoop. So those are two movements and two tools, if we're counting the roller coasters and the goblet squat holds. 4 different ways to kind of enforce having healthy center of mass position on your foot. Because if you don't have a good center of mass position on your foot, if you're too far back, you're going to fall backwards. If you go too far forward, you're going to get folded over, and your squat's going to look more like a good morning. Now, there's 2 more reasons, assume that's a 2, as to why you might be folding over more and more while squatting. And that is bad cues, or not even using cues, or as I said before, unactivated muscles, because your cues are going to determine which muscles are activated at which times, as well as bad bar position. See, there's this eternal debate of which is better, high bar or low bar. They both have their merits, they both have their detriments. I personally take kind of a hybrid in between, and I put the bar on top of my scapula, so it's neither high bar nor low bar. But very few people kind of point out, what does it mean to have low bar? And they just keep putting the bar lower and lower and lower until the bar is basically at their armpits, and they're completely folded over when they unrack the bar. So you don't want to be looking already good morning position, because it's also going to bring your hips up and make it harder for you to hit depth going too far low bar. So we want a good consistent bar position. We want the bar in a position that's going to allow us to hit depth and stay upright at the same time. High bar versus low bar, which bar is best for you? Now, low bar, you have a wider margin of error, so you're able to get away with bad form a little more. High bar has a lower margin of error. If you get out of position, you're immediately going to go into the good morning position, and you're going to stress out your erectors a little more. But notice what I said. When you get out of position, high bar is not as good as low bar. So if you have good form, a higher bar position will be beneficial towards you, and you'll be able to apply more of your power from your legs straight into the bar, because you're not going through the curvature of your spine like you would through low bar. So all of you who are saying, John Hack needs to go low bar, his high bar is not... No, John Hack he's got good form, he can use high bar. So just stop it right there. So let me get this microphone situated. Oh, these hooks are not in a good spot. But, so high bar. High bar, you're on top of the traps. And you can kind of see, I got a little bit of space up there. And you can go too high where you're just on your spine. Like here, I can feel it on my spine. You've got built-in bar pad known as your traps. So when you squat high bar, you need to be really strict with all your form. More strict than with low bar. If you notice, I got onto my toes a little there, and I kind of had to rock back. And there's no error there. Low bar, however, what I've been seeing a predominance of is going somewhere on the lats. So this is an actual bar position I've seen on someone. Notice how I'm already hunched forwards. Notice that lack of a healthy upright spine. Like if I go like this, the bar is going to slide or roll down. So I've got to be hunched over a bit in order to squat. But I've got a pretty wide margin of error because if I go forwards or if I go back, I've still got this hunch, and I just adjust the hunch in order to get the bar position over the right part of my foot. I tried to show that, and it just looked ugly. So high bar squat or low bar squat looks kind of like that. And that's too low because it allows a lot of softness to occur in your core because you're trying to get that hunched over and your core isn't able to get completely tight. You're not able to get your lats into the movement. So what generally happens is when you're in low bar, you hit depth and then your hips start to shoot up before your upper body does. And then it puts you in that good morning position because you're not able to transfer all that power into the bar because you're in this hunched over kind of position. So it looks kind of like if someone isn't tight on deadlifts, their hips start to come up before the bar starts to come up, except in squats, the hips start to come up before the bar starts to come up, but you're squatting. So the bar position I would suggest is on the scapula. So you've got the shoulder blades and there's a nice curvature, a nice ridge in the scapula for the bar to go. Your muscles stretch and flex and roll, they grow and develop. So that if you put it on musculature, the bar, it's not going to be as consistent. It's going to have a little bit of slide. It's going to have a little bit of roll. But if you put it on a rigid surface like your skeletal system, it's made to take loads like that. Your muscles aren't made to take loads. Your muscles are made to move, not take loads, unlike your mom. So you got to find that ridge in your scapula. It's if you've got big traps, you're going to have to find it under your trap. There it is, right there. And it's not exactly on my shoulders, but it's in that scapular ridge. And then just regular cues. And that's what a squat with good bar position looks like. Not to say that high bar or low bar are bad, because this, by definition, is a kind of low bar, but it's also a kind of high bar. It's a hybrid bar position, because I guess people don't use it very often. But what it does is it gets all the benefits of high bar, where you're able to stay more upright with the added benefit of having a larger margin of error from low bar. And the last thing we're going to talk about today is the lack of good cues or lack of muscle involvement. So the number one set of muscles that don't get involved, you got to brace, you got to get your lats involved. Those are the two most missed out cues. Bracing, because not everyone talks about bracing, and generally newer lifters aren't used to getting that internal core pressure required for squats, bench, and deadlift. But there's a little bit of a nuanced difference between squat, bench, and deadlift bracing. But when it comes to squatting, it's a little difficult for a lot of people to get their lats involved. There's a couple lat cues. There's get the elbows under the bar, where you kind of roll your shoulders forward, and not everyone's able to activate their lats like that. They're just under the bar and they're kind of tight. Another one is to pinch pencils between your armpits, where you get that roll and you kind of squeeze it a little better and you get a little bit of better back tension going there. And a third cue is lat pull down. So you get that tightness from pinching the pencils under your armpits, except that's not super directed towards the lats. You're incorporating your delts and everything. But if you lat pull down, you're incorporating the entire lat into the lat cue. Secondly, there's also hand position on the bar, which will affect how well you're able to get into that kind of bar position for your lats, or rather your elbow position. So if you're out too far, too wide, notice how I don't have, my elbows are kind of flared back, and I'm not, I can get the elbows under the bar, but I'm not getting a lot of lat engagement. Conversely, if I can manage to do this without popping my shoulder out, there's this super tight, which, yeah, your lats are tight, everything's tight, but the amount of stress that's going into your shoulders, your elbows, your wrists is not really that good. What I generally do is I get, these hooks are in the way, so I get about a 90-degree bend in my elbow, and I try to keep my wrist nice and rigid, because if I lat cue and my wrist is slack, you can see the wrist is not doing anything. You're not getting tight, but you keep that wrist tight. And I am squatting with Talon grip, which is not legal in USAPL because they don't allow people to have fun there. So I lat pull down and I kind of squeeze my elbows under the bar, and you can see a lot of lat tension going on there. So I'm able to keep a nice upright position. And if I go a little forwards, I had a little bit of overcorrection there, but you can kind of see I'm still staying upright and I'm not getting bent over. The only time that would be negative for me during that would be as if I get too far back, which that's something you kind of got to get used to with the goblet squat holds and the roller coasters, is developing that healthy relationship with center of mass from the bar and center of mass of the system on your foot. So we went over a lot today. We went over 2 exercises that are not barbell specific on how to train yourself to get a consistent and measurable way of getting the center of mass in the correct position on your foot. And that's with the roller coasters, making sure you have a good horizontal, the roll of the foot in a good position. So if you get out of whack there, you're in good position. I mean, you never want to get out of whack there because that's when knees blow out. So might as well train to have a good healthy position there. And also the forward and back on your foot with those goblet squat holds. Then we put everything together with the safety squat bar, trying to train ourselves to get onto our heels. And if we don't get onto our heels, what it feels like to fight and get into that position where you've got a healthy center of mass on the latter half of your foot, if you're in squat shoes, that is. And then we use the camber bar to kind of make sure that we're not having any sort of diagonal or J-related looking kind of bar path, and kind of making sure that once we have that healthy, we're sitting back onto the correct position on our heels, that we're keeping that consistent with the camber bar squat. Camber bar squat, not as useful or used as often in raw training as it is in multiply training. There's also another bar that not every gym has access to, and I didn't go over it today because so few gyms actually have access to the bar, and it's called a spider bar. And what it is it's a camber bar and a safety squat bar put together, and it does the best of both worlds. I personally prefer the spider bar over the camber bar or the safety squat bar, just because it's that much, it keeps you more honest, and it's a little harder. And then we went over bar position. There's such thing as too low for low bar, and what the negatives are with that low bar, where it's putting you into a negative position where you're not able to stay tight, get tight. You got some bar roll going on, and just the way that it is, it makes your hips rise before the bar, and it puts you in that good morning position, puts a lot of stress on your erectors. And then we went into the upper body cues. You got to brace. You got to brace for every single compound movement. You got to have good core pressure and good bracing. One of the cues for bracing is how fat can you get, and then kind of contract that and almost get ready to get punched in the stomach. I have a whole video on bracing, just bracing for squat, bench, and deadlift. If you guys want to look back on that, I'll link it in the description. And then we went over the lat cues, because there are a lot of lat cues out there. Not everyone's going to be able to understand what they mean. So the lat cue of lat pull down also kind of feeds into the way that we train our lats for squats on squat days. We got that plane of motion. We train our lats as if we're doing a lat pull down. So I hope you guys understood what I was talking about today. If you guys have any questions, comment them below. And I'm still answering everyone as fast as I can. I get a little too addicted to social media, so I have to put timers on everything. So I'm not super active on Instagram or Facebook right now, but I'm more active on YouTube because there's less girls in nostalgic cosplays dancing. I admit to my faults. Y'all should be admitting to your faults too. It's not a fault. It's Japan's fault. But comment below any questions. I'm glad to answer them. And if you have any more video suggestions, this video itself was suggested by a viewer. And if you have any other video suggestions or big questions you want asked in a video, then write them below as well. Let me get those peepees out of my mouth. As always, this has been Patrick, your mom's favorite powerlifter. Tell her I said hi, and see you in the next one.